Got that official PMI figure coming out of China this weekend, and then we have the flash manufacturing one, but both show the same thing, a downtrend. What's your assessment?
Well, some people had hoped for a snapback after the Chinese New Year, right? There's this idea that people coming back to the factories, things are firing up again, and it hasn't really worked so far. So the economy is still decelerating, and probably into the second quarter we're going to get softer numbers still.
How do you sort of gauge the yuan's weakness, particularly this past month, but particularly last week? Bit of a surprise, Fred.
It was a bit of a surprise, but it's understandable from a perspective of the Chinese central bank. They have a lot of carry trades into the country. They've had trouble kind of managing onshore financial conditions. Every time they tighten, more capital comes in. So this is designed to shake out some of those trades, reestablish the grip, if you will, of the central bank over domestic monetary conditions.
Do you think it's a new trend or just a one-off?
I think it's a trend that might be with us for a little while longer. It wouldn't necessarily derail the long-term appreciation of the yuan. There's still this idea that you want to establish the yuan as an international currency, and for that you need to have strength. But for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we might see more volatility, which is ultimately a goal, and possibly even a weaker yuan to really reestablish or set a signal, if you will, to the market that the PBOC is not, that the yuan is not a one-way bet.
Do you think that this is coincidental, this PBOC communication to the markets, that you can't assume what we're going to do here in China, that this volatility could be, you know, laying down the groundwork for what we're going to see in terms of reform from the National People's Congress?
I think it's more coincidental. For a while now, there was a clear tension between what the PBOC tried to do onshore and capital coming into the country. So it got, you know, to a point where the PBOC really had to lay down a marker. It just happened to be around the NPC. So I think it's more coincidental than really something that's connected.
How sort of groundbreaking will this Wednesday onwards, next 2 weeks of NPC reforms? Much is expected, much is needed, much is wanted. Pollution, obviously. What do you think actually will, based on history and what they do?
Well, we kind of know what they want to do. They gave us a list of 60-odd reforms back in November. Now it's really about which one are they going to prioritize and how they're going to fill in the blanks. And here we'll look for, you know, some signals on the fiscal policy side. Will they allow, for example, local governments to issue more bonds? What will they do on interest rates? And possibly what will they do in the hukou household registration system? And these are really some of the first steps. There's a lot more that will have to come, but don't get too excited about the NPC. It's not the end-all of the reform process.
Well, I mean, having said that, how much credence do you put on the NPC? As a China watcher, as an analyst, you know, we did see the 60 reforms come out in November. But could this be a continuation of more forceful language? Is that what you're going to be hearing or listening for?
We'll be very much looking at the press conference by Li Keqiang at the end of the process and trying to read between the lines, if you will, of how exactly he's going to sequence reforms. I think that's really what this NPC is about. We know what the broad reform process is, but we don't know the exact sequencing.
What do you mean by sequencing?
So which reforms will be prioritized, which will be tackled first, which will be put on the back burner? For example, in the past few weeks, there's a sense that perhaps state-owned enterprise reform might not be one of the priorities to be implemented this year. This may well wait until next year or the year after that. But this year, it's financial reform, it is fiscal reform that might be prioritized. But what exactly comes first and what second, I think we have to wait for that press conference.
You know, a friend of mine was in China again. I just saw him on the weekend. He was in China. He's an entrepreneur again, importing goods, etc. And he said that a lot of his clients are concerned about one thing, mainly one thing. That's the communist and capitalist system, balancing that out again. And they're actually very worried about the future and the cracks emerging because of that in society, as opposed to everything else.
Well, there are underlying tensions, right? You have a burgeoning private sector, but you still have a large state-owned enterprise sector, and there's by no means ideological consensus in China of where exactly the economy is going to go. I find it striking that in Western countries we always have big ideological disagreement and assume that the Chinese have figured it all out and are going down one road. But the reality is they still are discussing the ultimate options. How is the economy going to look like in 5 to 10 years? And that ideological consensus hasn't been formed yet.
And they're all making plan Bs, my friend was saying. They're making plan Bs just in case it really does crack the system, you know?
Well, and I mean, you don't have the communication of transparency here because of the communist system. I mean, all of this ideological discussion is done behind closed doors. So what do you have to look for? I mean, it really is reading tea leaves here, and everybody else, including your friend, is guessing.
It is reading tea leaves, but it's one of the joys of being a China watcher, right? You need to look at statements by officials. You need to see what's been leaked in the media. You need to have private conversations with individual officials and piece the puzzle together, if you will. But it's an ongoing process because it's a shifting target. You know, what China will actually implement is not sort of laid out clearly. It's sort of as they go along, they'll kind of, you know, improvise, and that's therefore it's a shifting target.